Welcome back, everyone. I've got Harry with me today. Harry is my co-creator of Marketing Unfiltered. We decided we were having a chat about what sort of needed in the market, and Harry and I thought with the way that the world is evolving and the way that it's been really confusing for a lot of marketing leaders, we should do a brand mini masterclass. So to put Harry on the spot, Harry's going to put on his brand hat and dive in and give us answer loads of questions and give us loads of inspiration, hopefully. So, Harry, you good with that?
Yeah, I'm going to try my best.
Perfect. Right. So, Harry, the question I think everyone's going to really want to know is what is brand really now, and why do so many people say so many different things?
I think I was going to think about this question and do some clever science answer to it, but then I sort of got tracked back into the back history, source of branding in the first place, and it was the steaming stamp on a piece of cow's ass, and that's how you identified your property, and it was differentiated between different herd of cattle, blah 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 blah. But it's not that at all these days. That seems like a rather redundant story. Effectively, why it's so difficult is because it's so expansive. What it can be, what can influence it, what can affect it. At its very source, for me, brand is all the good bits about what you're producing that potential customers and current customers like about you. But it's in many ways ethereal. It isn't the product, because the product is the product. It isn't the price, because the price is the price. It's effectively all the wraparound stuff. It's the feeling they get when they interact with you, whether it be a social media post or a CRM email or a sponsorship you've been doing for 10 years with teams that you might love. It's the way you talk to customer service. More often than not, it's the negative experiences you have as a customer with a brand when things are going wrong, how they interact with you, how they treat you. Those are the opportunities to make a really significant difference. So spending lots of money on a big brand campaign, which I think is the sort of most naive perception of it. Go on TV, it isn't direct response, ergo, it's a brand campaign. That's one arm in a sort of 80-armed octopus. And all the bits of it are effectively trying to do two things: make people think more warmly about you than they do about the competition, and two, generate that incremental brand fame. And I really like someone very clever sort of framed it as such. It is about generating fame. As much as I dislike the cult of celebrity we live in now, what we're all trying to do with the brands we're involved in as marketers is make them as famous as possible within the constrictions of the budget and the markets we're in. And within that capacity as being known, that alone is quite a good start, because you can't buy something from someone you don't know. You've got to be aware of them to start with. And then beyond that awareness, trickle down all these different customer touch points, which generates theoretically the warm, cozy feelings that make you feel safe, secure, loved, appreciated. All of those things are generated through these touch points. And equally, all the bad vibes get generated through those touch points. Your goal as a marketer is to have way more warm, cozy touch points than there are negative, horrible ones. And the net result of all of that is, okay, I'm making a purchasing decision. At some point, I'm buying something boring. I'm buying a kettle. Who am I buying a kettle from? And you've done a great piece of work on this, Danny. We might link it into the bottom of this, but it's looking at the new realm of touch points. And first of all, you probably go online, either you go to GPT or you go to Google and you look at best rated kettles, UK, right? And it'll give you Morphy Richards, Kenwood, Philips, bunch of other lists, a couple of Chinese brands that look amazing, you've not really heard of, but they're incredibly cheap and their user reviews are great. And from that platform, you then might get a deep dive into some of them. It might be review sites, it might be UGC content, it might be a YouTube video with someone testing 10 of them. It might be a trusted brand who does a lot of reviews, supposedly independently. And you'll go through all these different zones. And then at the end of it, purchasing decisions happen. Now, to get a head start in that game, you'll be known. Philips, it's a good brand. It's Dutch. It's been around forever. My dad had a Philips TV, etc., etc. Versus Sangtip kettles from Taipei. Never heard of them, but their price is way down there, and it looks like a cooler kettle. So there's good bits over there, but there's a really good bit over here with, I trust that brand. I think they make good stuff. And my dad's telly was around for 30 years and didn't break. The brand stuff elevates you as a start point. And then that's why when I look at brand marketing, it is this rather cheesy brand X performance phrase of, if your brand marketing is going well, then it will incrementally lift your performance marketing. If you don't invest in brand marketing, if you just go, yep, it's price, product, and placement, then whatever you put in budget-wise into direct response, you'll get a static line. And if that's okay, if the ROI is okay, you do that forever and ever. No one's going to give you an award. No one's going to promote you unduly, but you'll stay at a job. Brand X performance is where the brand sentiments lift the performance of your performance marketing into realms which other people can't touch. And that's where the likes of Philips and Coke and Red Bull understand continual investment in brand is harder to attribute, which means it's always a difficult conversation with CFOs and CEOs. It tends to be cut early. And we're in this whole realm now where senior marketers and CMOs tend not to last the 5 years required to see a full thread of brand investment come to fruition. So somebody wrote something the other day I saw, which is interesting, about why should we care about brand when we're going to be judged and then probably let go or move on before that investment comes to play? Why should we care? Why don't we just go in for fast and dirty performance-driven channels? It's a fascinating premise. We'll probably dive into a bit deeper later on. But the net effect is brand is the ethereal, good, warm, cozy stuff that lifts your ability to perform on all your paid channels elsewhere. And if you get it right, then you will go above the competition. And Sangtip kettles, whilst incredibly cheap and have a market of their own, they're never going to be able to catch up with you. They'll never be able to charge the 40% extra price point that you're able to command with 25% incremental margin. They won't touch that. They might touch it because they produce so cheaply, but they'll never touch it on an ongoing concern across multiple markets. That's where, in a roundabout way, brand is so important.
There was a lot in there, and I think something that there was a few things that I was going to pull out was, if you speak to anyone who's based and working in performance, the one thing that they struggle to understand often is the moment you go from being unknown to known. And very often when I say to someone, you're a brand, is when someone searches for your brand name and then the keywords or like variations of keywords for you to appear in search or on any sort of platform or network. And then when you've really hit it is when someone searches for your brand and then the product name, or the brand and then product variations. And I think that's something that is often lost now with like D2C or performance-based brands, or even let's call them companies. And that's something that I think isn't necessarily explained very well, and often is lost in conversation, basically because, like you said, the brand X performance conversation and the tenure conversation and the struggles that people have within CMOs or marketing leader roles has really hindered how people construct and build the scaffolding and the foundations for the company to evolve and move forward. So with all that said, one of the questions that I came up with for you before we hit record was, is brand bigger than strategy?
It's a toughie. It's probably one of the ones I wanted to just pull the ripcord on because I didn't want to get it totally wrong. But no, I mean, for me, there is a clear answer, and strategy supersedes everything. Strategy is the all-encompassing, and within, if we do one of our lovely pyramid diagrams, strategy is right up there at the top. And within that strategy is a conversation about brand, about performance, about product, about pricing, about everything else, and the interlinking factors between all of those. And those are conversations between all of those things. You can't have brand above everything as a sort of God floating along with angel wings and shooting down wonderfulness, and then strategy feeds off that like some weird lizard. That doesn't work whatsoever. You have to have strategy at the top of the tree and then brand in the conversation, and then understanding what are the implications of what you need to do with brand and what you need to do for your customers on their behalf, what the products needs to do to meet the needs of the market as it is now, what you can do with your brand piece to facilitate that product conversation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it is that simple answer of strategy sits at the top of the tree.
Yeah, the one challenge I'd have to that is when you're creating your annual plan, what a lot of people call their strategy, and it's evolving, it's often they need the guiding light. Like, I don't love North Star because it gives people, often it misdirects how people should move forward with their marketing or with their company. So one thing I often say to businesses is your brand should be almost like the big circle that you want to sort of feed in towards, as opposed, because your strategy will change over time. I always say you should think 5 years ahead, plan 3 years ahead, and action the 1 year ahead of that. So often I'll say brand should be the thing that guides you. And if your strategy is moving you and your customers away from brand, there's probably a bigger problem at play, rather than your brand should try and be the guardrails for a lot of strategy. It shouldn't be more important, but it should act as the guardrails. So that's why I sort of asked the question is more, how do you see it? And as someone who has built many well-known brands and helped many companies, that's something that I think is another area which is lost in conversation or is lost in translation often.
Yeah. But it's all going to change anyway. I mean, ideally, you'll do whether a brand refresh or a brand positioning and an architecture at one point, and you want to largely keep on that track for a 5 year period, not least because it's so bloody expensive to refresh everything. It's confusing. Customers don't know where they stand. So you want to have a long term for the positioning and architecture piece. Sure. Strategy, there's going to be strategy within every facet. The brand strategy as you move into new markets, as the world changes around you, as channels emerge. If you had a singular strategy 3 years ago, even, or no, 5 years ago, going back a long way, that would have been redundant within 2 years. And that was before AI got its claws into the entire world and shifted how we all operate. Imagine if you were performance driven 10 years ago and PPC and a little bit of paid social was your thing. And you said, right, this is us strategically, 5 years, the brand's going to do this. It's going to be executed through these channels and communicated in this way. That becomes redundant within 4 months, 5 months. So I think there's such things, looking at the business strategy, which is what we need to accomplish as an entire organization. Marketing as a vertical, as a discipline, feeds off that, or has to feed off that and go, right, in order to accomplish this is what we need to do. Our brand needs to be reset to meet these market needs and these customer needs to get that sort of commercial return in those markets. We're going to shape that, and we're going to have this as a long-ranging brand architecture. Strategically on the brand, we are going to basically pivot how we communicate that in the different channels. And that isn't tactical pivoting. That's annual strategic pivoting. What happened last year? What channels work? Where do we get the most impact? And whether it's brand tracking, whether it's NPS, whatever you're using, that's going to influence how you then reposition. And those are strategic choices. They aren't sort of tactical pivots done daily. So I think underneath that business strategy, you can have a long range brand structural piece, which you want to stick to and be confident in and lead the way, as all the great brands have done, because they haven't changed, some of them in decades, in the nuts and bolts of what makes them them. When you look at Coke, it's 50 years, it's barely changed a jot. But then how you communicate that and how you take that through into the other channels, into the markets and into new markets is very significant. And then looking at something, the brand influence, recently we've seen how people are trying to go into geo with content marketing, and how until 2 days ago, Reddit was the be all and end all, and no one quite understood it. And it was that hilarious thing of everyone running around going, no idea how it works, but it seems to be that Reddit's being picked up by the Gen AI and by the LLMs. Do something, just dive in there. It was all hilariously car crashy. And then suddenly that seems to be over. Looking at the traffic 2 days ago, they've stopped. They pivoted how they're getting their source information. Now, that's part of your brand strategy, is your content marketing. And strong brands have good content in multiple sources. They would have come across very authentically. They would have probably done very well so far. And the ones that have done really deep mapping of how their brand comes across multiple significant and well-loved channels, they will still continue to do well in the AI space. And it's an interesting one, because if anything, this is starting to put an onus back on brand being pragmatically important as well as an ethereal important factor. Is if you don't invest very, very heavily in website content, how you feature on socials, how you feature in content, Reddit and beyond Reddit, if you don't feature heavily in those in an authentic manner that is then replicated by real people around the world in their hundreds and thousands, you won't come up at all. And Gen AI is a closed book for you. And that's going to get terrifying fairly quickly. If you look at the rate with which Gen AI search is biting at Google's heels, and quite frankly, how Google will pivot themselves with their AI products, you've got to be in that fight, even if you don't know what it looks like. You've got to be testing now. And that's brand work. That's how your brand's represented in these ethereal channels that aren't hardcore performance driven. So, sorry, long answer to a concise question, but I think you can have that long-ranging plan for re-architecture, and I think you can stay with that. It's important to be consistent so people know what they're getting. You build your castle and you guard it. But I think how that's then communicated and the way with which it's communicated, that will change in light with regular strategic updates and then trickle down into your tactical activity.
I think that is part of them. This is like the core of the mini masterclass. I think this is something that's been lost for such a long time, that the architecture piece is something that people don't necessarily really consider. I think the more traditional marketeers have an idea and understanding and want to roll this out. I think whereas some of the newer breed, whether they were specialists and become more generalists, is something that was never really passed down, I don't think. It was kind of policed downwards as opposed to coached downwards or around them. And I think when you've probably experienced this, when you go into a boardroom and you go into, senior leadership meetings or ELTs, and you go down the alleyway of brand, you just lose people really quickly because it's just something that has never really been proven. It's really difficult for people to understand and get real feelers around the value of it, and it feels fussy.
What it is, it sounds, and I'll be the first to admit it, it sounds like marketing bullshit, because you look at the phrasing, brand vision, brand mission, brand personality. It sounds like posters on the wall of a gym in the 1980s. It sounds shit until you understand the sort of science behind it and the rationale behind all those elements. And this is the reason I sort of got more into doing brand consultancy sort of 10, 15 years ago. Because I was involved in a project doing a brand refresh. The budget had gone past 2 million euros. And I'm sure I've talked about this before with you. And one of the pages of the architecture book, which was, 8 inches thick, one of the pages was AstroTurf, because in the words of the Austrian design studio, you could feel the brand. At which point I sort of spat out my cornflakes. I was like, what? And that's the sort of shit that really got that brand architecture piece in trouble, is people were becoming comfortable billing bigger and bigger amounts of money, which they had to fill up books with more and more shit to justify it. And that, there's big business. This isn't just sort of small brand design agencies. All the big network agencies have the functions to do this. And the bigger the brand, the bigger the budget they feel they need to spend in it. And my premise with Brand Architect was, it doesn't really matter how big the brand is. It's not like a bigger book is required for a bigger business. It's not like Coke needs 8 million pages because it's Coke. A brand architecture really should be accomplishable within 8 pages. And then your design style guidelines, obviously they might roll out quite a lot because you might have lots of sub brands and lots of different market needs. That's fine. Take the design piece out of it. But the core structure, which for me is brand vision, brand positioning, brand mission, personality, tone of voice. Well, there's elements within personality, including tone of voice, but there's basically 5 pages there, all of which are linked together. And the first bit, brand vision, is where you want to be in 5 years' time. It's called a vision. It's a vision statement. It's like, right, with a fair wind and a lot of effort and all of us just cracking this, we can be there. And it's difficult and it sounds scary, but that's your words, the North Star effort, right? And underneath that vision is like, well, okay, so positioning. It's like, how do we need to frame our brand? Where are the opportunities in this space for us to stand out for the customers that exist out there? What are they going to be most motivated by? What do we need to look like to appeal to them the most for the longest period of time? There's your positioning, and it's differentiated. And then underneath that, the mission is an internal facing piece. And everyone does it different, which is part of the problem because there's no universal way of doing this. But my mission statements, maximum 5, would be internal facing. Put them on the wall. These are the things we do every single day. And if we do these, we accomplish that positioning. And if we do that, then in 5 years, we can get to the vision. So very much a ladder upwards from there. And those mission things, they're your actions. Every day we do this with our product, with our people, on behalf of the customers, we will get to the positioning statement that we aspire to have. And that leads us to the vision. And then underneath that, it is the tactical elements. It's how does that look in everyday life? What's our tone of voice? What's our personality? Those are the tools which every designer, every copywriter, every AI agent takes on board. So everything's consistent, but not just consistent. It's the good version. It's the best version of your brand every single day. And that consistency breeds efficiency because you have none of this wastage, none of this like, oh my God, that social post sucks and it looked boring and we're just doing it because we need to do something. No. The rules are here. We always exceed expectations. We always put a smile on people's faces. Everything has to make our customers and our potential customers in the world have a smile because of what we're doing. For example, if you follow the rules, and I've done that conversation, you can tell it's a bit of a speech. I've done 26 brand refresh or brand guidelines from scratch projects in the last 8 years. And in-house, I had to do that speech multiple times in each organization I was in because people don't get it. And the one takeaway from this for anyone who's going through it or wanting to go through it, it's a bit like the hook and hold of writing social posts or, trying to write viral posts or whatever. Invest half your time in the hook, invest half your time in the education and the talking through and the taking people on the journey with you. Half the time, maybe more than half the time. The rest of it, quite frankly, is relatively easy to do. But if you don't invest that time at the beginning to get everyone on the journey with you, then you start losing them. Like you say, people start mentally leaving the room. It becomes easy to vilify. It looks costly. Or why should we be doing this and not this project that's going to make us some money next month? All of these things are filtering in like evil little leeches and sucking the blood out of what your long range project is. So invest that time wisely into the key decision makers, the CEO, the CFO, department heads, the team members who are going to have to do this. And one of the easiest ways to do it in my methodology is when you're doing the workshops to build out all these elements and you're playing the games and doing all the fun stuff to bring the bits together. Bring in representatives from across the business. Definitely have the CEO in both workshops. Probably have the CFO. He or she will be totally useless, not contribute anything of interest, but at least they're in the room understanding how you got there. And at least they're in the room having the opportunity to have their voice heard. So when they bitch about in the future, you might not point a finger and say, you literally were there and you had a chance. They know that. And on a more positive lilt, they should understand much more deeply why you're going through the process, what the end result is and how you got there and what it means commercially. All those bits put together, I'd say, are some of the most important parts. And then the brand refresh, the architecture, the design style, once you finish the first part, the words, you then turn that into a design brief. And then that should be a very strong design brief for your design team, your agency to go, okay, I completely understand who you're targeting, what you're trying to do, where you're trying to be. And here's the design concepts for your brand, the that really will get you there, because it's designed for that future purpose, not for today's purpose. And that's one of the other mistakes people make is, they're a brand that's 20 years old, never been touched. And then it's like, oh, we should sort of keep these bits, and we should really, that bit, someone really liked back in the day. Nothing is sacred. Things do stay, but everything needs to have its tires kicked. So it's there on merit, not for traditional sentimental reasons. So that's kind of the summary thing I found after doing a few of these.
I think what we'll do is we'll dive into like your layers of brand and what you do in your workshops. And what we'll do is we'll flash up, if you're okay with it, the slide that you go through, because I think that visual is just going to help so many people who aren't as confident in brand or not. There's a couple of things I just want to add.
No, I think it's fine.
There's a couple of things I'd like to add. I think what some people aren't doing enough is calling out the three states of companies. What we used to be, so what we were before. So it's telling people we were. It's telling people what we are today, and understanding that and giving people guidelines, not rules, because humans believe rules are made to be broken. Guidelines keep them on the straight and narrow. And then what we're going to be. So if you can tell people, yes, we were that, but today we are, and where we're going to be and how we're going to get there, I think enables people, especially from a brand and marketing perspective, to understand that. Like you said in the workshops, if you bring the CFO or FD or the equivalent within your business into it, there's no surprises when they see next year's budget. So if you can keep reminding them, short term we're doing this, mid term we're doing this, long term we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z, there's no surprises for them. And if you're smart and use PQ, as I call it, political intelligence, take them on the journey and just remind them and get closer to them. They'll buy into it because they've seen the data, they've seen the results, they understand the path that you're going on. When people over-explain and over-defend, that becomes the problem, and it becomes like a surprise thing for them. So that's the extension I'd give. And on something else that you said, I think if you can understand where your brand truly influences the rest of the business, you can then start building out your comms plan. And say, for instance, after the workshop, what I tend to do is if you've got people who are great on camera or great on podcasts, as quickly as possible, get them on other podcasts and get them talking, or whether you start recording your own and doing small videos, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc., and get them talking around the brand, because it's fresh in their mind. They'll connect it to what they're doing and it'll be more holistic. Whereas what tends to happen is they're not involved. So they go off and they don't ever talk around it. So it just feels disjointed. And the more advocates that you have, the better that the story becomes, the more investment it is, and the less that it becomes an executive fight as opposed to something that everyone's bought into and calls out a lot.
No,
so
I very much agree with that.
So in your workshop, and we'll flash it up on the screen and it'll be on the support and newsletter. Something that you're very clear is on the layers. So if we were to think of it from a pyramid from bottom to top, you have your brand vision, your brand personality, including tone of voice. Then going up the pyramid, you've got brand positioning, your missions, and like you said, maximum of 5. And then you have what's really important is the benefit and supporting information. So the emotional benefit, the rational benefit, the brand history, and the brand vision. And then you have your core brand benefits. Do you think some of that's been lost a little bit more recently, or it's sort of degraded a little bit because of the short-termism of a lot of companies at the moment?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think everyone does this a different way. I mean, that's literally the sort of things I plucked out as being the ones I think are most useful. And in its simplest form, where is it most useful? It's most useful in a brief. How much briefing happens these days? Compared to like when I got my trousers on in agency life 20 odd years ago, that was everything. Briefings encompassed understanding the customer, understanding the product, understanding the market, understanding the media, having a budget, and then crafting out for a creative team or a media team what the intention was and giving them all the information possible so they could then take it away and be on brief. That's the whole point about being on brief. I don't know how much that ever happens anymore. I rarely wrote briefs in my last permanent roles, apart from big projects like this, when I'd go to absolute town on it. The brief itself would be a project. So I think elements probably have been lost. And again, it comes to understanding of if people are thinking short term and thinking, right, well, we've seen it quite a lot recently with a lot of sort of senior marketers being let go. We've seen some structural shifts where CEOs are like, well, why can't the heads of or the senior managers of the channels just execute because they're good at it and they understand it and we've given them money and they plug in. And theoretically, everything carries on the curve it's been doing. But it obviously removes one big dose of A, strategy, and B, integration. And pieces don't talk to each other. People who are heads of a channel tend to be really, really, really good at strategy and execution, tactical execution of that channel, but have very little experience of any of the other channels. So how can they possibly understand what the best way to interconnect those pieces are so the sum becomes greater than the parts? The same thing would apply here. If you are missing sort of key elements, like the vision's there to give everyone one point to aim for. It's also there as part of this exercise of brand refresh, for example, to go, okay, the first thing we'll do is the vision, because we want to just get a really big mega statement in our minds. And that is everything else we do. If it's not contributing to getting us there, it's not right. And the same thing with positioning. You get the positioning, which is designed to then feed in to get us to that mission, to that vision. Underneath that, the mission bits, etc., etc. The ladder is there for a reason, and it basically allows for self-validation through the process. If pieces of it are missing, it's like, well, yeah, we know where we're going in 5 years' time, and we're going to execute channels like this with channel strategy. Okay, well, A, how the pieces going to join together. B, what happens when things change? Do we lean entirely on the channels that are working? That's quite a naive approach. Do we invest in testing and research around new ways to execute the current channels? What do we do with the brand positioning when the positioning doesn't fit the world at large anymore? That can happen too. So I think having it in that formal structure, which covers all the facets building into each other, all the way down to an execution level, that's really clear. And it's back to that consistency breeds efficiency point I made before. And I use that as a sort of slide in its own right in the workshops. The moment you stray away from consistency, then you have wastage. And the biggest enemy, we have enough wastage. We know our data is normally a bit rubbish. We know Google's data is normally a bit rubbish. We know performance marketing spends and the feedback loops are not accurate or timely enough to be really perfect. They're often far from perfect. Wastage is everywhere. And most of us are operating in a world where if we're doing 50% of the potential capacity, that's probably still a profitable line of attack. And we're kind of okay with it because we've got used to it. Now, this is an opportunity to mitigate wastage, one of the few, until we get single source of truth data and it's perfect, and the wonderful world that exists in the future that I dream of. Until then, mitigating wastage is absolutely the highest priority, because you're just chucking percentage points away, and we can't afford to do that. I mean, there's very few businesses that are flying so high, they literally can afford to do that, because it's not worth their time to spend time looking inwards, because looking forwards is making them so much money for everyone else. And I think that consistency of keeping structural plans on your brand strategy, that's how you do it, and do it in whichever form works for you. But some of those elements are key elements, in my opinion.
Exactly. So with all of that said, brand, if we were to break it down, when would you recommend? I think this is a question that a lot of people struggle with is, and this is, LinkedIn fodder for a lot of people, is I think brand reintroduction, brand refresh, and a rebrand are all things that I'll explain it. And what I mean is reintroducing the brand and the products in a light way, not having to spend loads of money. A brand refresh is like when you give your house a lick of paint and you put new wallpaper up. And a rebrand is obviously the all-singing, all-encompassing, very expensive project that a lot of people want to undertake. When do you recommend the sort of three? So what about a brand reintroduction? How frequently or how often do you think people should do it?
think you should be assessing the status of your brand constantly, and that's via brand tracking, etc. I think you should be looking at it as a deep dive, and if you're lucky enough to have a brand team, that should be annually, because when you're building a brand strategy out, where are we? How are we doing? How is it being received? Is it still current? So that should be at the very least annually. It doesn't require a brand reintroduction, but it might do. It might be that the findings of that piece of work say, actually, we're behind. Our competitors are leaping ahead in all these ways, and so we need to do something about this. So I think the assessment should be at the very least annual, but I think the tracking should be constant, and the reintroduction needs must. If that annual audit suggests it is appropriate, that's when it takes place.
Something you said, Harry, you sort of mentioned that if all the brand signals that's coming in suggest a reintroduction, do you not think with a lot of the products, if you're a company that has a lot of products and you're releasing them often, do you think you still need them then? Or do you think your products are working hard enough for your brand? Or does that come from your tracking and all the intel that you have?
If you're the sort of business that releases products regularly, then your brand strategy should be able to stomach that. That should be part and parcel of the toolkit and something like methodology of the brand strategy, whether you're a house of brands or a branded house, whichever one you've chosen to be, your brand strategy and architecture should be able to handle that without any sort of regression. The product should sit comfortably under that. If suddenly you pivoted into an entirely new product line that requires a rethink, then I think you need to assess whether you need to sit a new subsidiary within the brand family. But you certainly shouldn't limit your options because the world's offered you an opportunity on the product side and you've taken it and you go, well, shit, now we need to redo the whole brand thing. That's a baby and bathwater decision. I think if you're releasing regular products and that's what you've done for the last 10 years or 20 years, then your architecture should allow for that. And then you position the product, it goes into the family, it has certain structures that allows it to fit. And then you roll from there. And if it's entirely brand new, then maybe a subsidiary within the family and it takes its own rules or becomes an independent standalone brand supported by the mothership. But you don't want to be robbing, or you don't want to be making a mess of things for neatness sake. I'm a big advocate of pragmatism. That if the world's changed and innovation has allowed you to do something new and snazzy, do the best version of that. Let it be the best thing it can be and fit it into the brand family. And if it feels a little bit like a bastard child, that's fine. No one's got a gun to your head for neatness in this stuff. They have got a gun to your head for commercial payback and ROI, but they haven't got one for neatness. So just be pragmatic and say, what's the best for the business and for the entity? And if it's something you can plan in advance for because it's a regular product release, it should fit in seamlessly. It should have been planned for. It's brand new, then let it live in its own little entity and have the benefits of being in the family, but not be hamstrung by it.
How about a rebrand? That's obviously the question everyone wants to know is when should you, or when is it appropriate to do a rebrand?
Well, with my sort of consultant's hat on, who does a lot of brand architecture projects, I mean, every 2 weeks, clearly, every business should rebrand and hire expensive consultants in. The better answer, the less facetious one, is something needs to be significantly and clearly not working, and it's funny. I'm a living cliche, having sort of joined in X number of businesses over the last 15 years, CMO or VP or marketing director roles. And I've done a brand refresh in 5 of them over 15 years. I think it's 5. But I did them not because I like doing brand refresh projects, even though I do. I enjoy doing them. I did them because what was inherited or what was present sucked. It was either not existent, written on one page by an agency 10 years before, completely out of kilter with what the business actually did and what the customers actually looked like, and everything else about it was wrong. So something needed to be done. And so the refresh was kind of a, polish a turd exercise. Or the business had significantly greater plans. It wanted to be in a bigger place. It had access to more funds. It was big investment, and the shape of its brand didn't allow for that. It was wearing its little boy trousers, and it wants to be putting a suit on and getting into big business. Those are good reasons to do it, but you don't do it. I mean, the idea that it's like, oh, you should refresh every 5 years. I say maybe have a look at it every 5 years as a rule. If you're lucky enough to be a CMO who has a job for 5 years, then yes, have a look at it and go, do you know what? I think it's working fine, but we haven't looked at it under a microscope. We looked at it tactically. We looked at our NPS scores. We look at that as part of our BAU, but we haven't really kicked the tires. We haven't spent 6 months and a bit of money seeing what this could be in a world and then putting that in front of customers in quote unquote research. I think that exercise every 5 years is good business. And I suggest you'll probably find that some form of refresh is going to be appropriate. Because back to my original point from a while ago, the world moves so quickly and has moved on. And a business operating 5 years ago, I mean, take COVID out of the equation. So a business operating 7 years ago is in an entirely different world. You know, digital products operating now, app stores are different, social media is different, content marketing is different, AI is present, and a million other things are new, and the audience is different. You know, if you're a business targeting 22 to 30-year-olds, you know, your 22-year-olds were 15-year-old teenagers when you put all this stuff together. What are they thinking? What are they needing? How do they perceive the world? What matters to them? So I think, you know, if you aren't doing it every 5 years, you're missing a trick, because you're probably going to find enough reason. And, you know, point of a brand refresh. It isn't wholesale. It isn't the buy a new house and burn the other one to the ground. You might not change the logo because the logo is perfectly fine. And why spend lots of money on a new logo when everyone knows and loves yours? The consistency of logos is important. So really, you ought to be careful about chucking that out, because you've got a design whim and you want to go for some nice lunches in Soho. So you protect the assets that are still meaningful and motivating and mean something to the world and customers at large. Maybe it's the periphery. Maybe it's the positioning. Maybe it's the personality doesn't really fit in the modern world. Maybe, you know, being a laddish sort of lad mag style thing, which worked for you in 2012, that's obviously not going to work as well today, if at all. So I think it's assessing every 5 years, definitely. Keep tracks on it constantly, like I said before, and then judge which elements do you need looking at, because there's a notable and significant benefit to doing so, and be critical in that. I think as long as you're staying away for we're doing it for doing its sake, which I know a lot of businesses do, and I know a lot of marketing people, and probably a little bit of me as well, is I want to do it because I don't believe this is the best version. But if you're looking at it objectively, like totally objectively, I think you probably do find pieces that could be improved every 5 years without cannibalizing the goodness that you've, or you know, the stuff you've invested in, the stuff that had made you get to that level, and view it at that critical level of what's a net incremental improvement and enhancement, and what is something we covet, we should protect, and have that lens on it, and you won't go too far wrong.
One of my favorite examples I give to people is when a company pivots. So they pivot like product, or use the modern example. We're going to add on a load of AI features. Is that the right time to rebrand? What do you think?
Not necessarily. No, it depends what the brand was to start with. If it was a brand that was known for being innovative and forward thinking and future proof, well, no, you're great. You're golden. You're doing exactly what the brand's intent was. You're just pivoting into a new, innovative, technologically enhanced direction. Well done, you. Congrats on having a brand that can stomach it and thrive off it. So, no, I think we run the risk of getting into like rules for rules' sake, and I think that's the point with a lot of marketing is rules don't actually add up, because every brand in every market for every customer is different and means a different thing. And putting some singular judgments of this is what you must do. And I know, again, I'm guilty of being in some of the articles I write. I'm like, yeah, you should do this. It's great. And I normally mean it emotionally, and I'm probably not right most of the time, because I think you've got to go on a sort of time and needs basis. And that's the other thing as well, time. What we all know, what worked yesterday doesn't tend to work tomorrow. That's the delightful thing about a career we never get bored of. It's also a freaking nightmare because we can't sit on our laurels and just repeat methodologies. They just don't work because everything changes. Tech changes, channels change, people change, customers change, rules change. And if we stuck to what worked yesterday, it works usually incrementally less well over time. So we've got to have that ability to flex and make pragmatic, objective judgments about where we are now, where we perceive we need to be going, and whether the brand is in the shape that is optimum for that 1 year, 3 year, 5 year future. Then make good decisions based on that information.
That's where I think a lot of creators are struggling a little bit, is where they go from a creator into a brand, and with products is their audience matures and grows up. So how do they either mature and grow up with them, or how do they stick and serve, like you were saying, the 17 to 30-year-olds, or how do they really consider offering products that mature with them, or do they stick to a core market? Something else that you said, a rebrand is probably one of the hardest jobs that you'll ever have to do as a marketing leader. However many times you've done it before, it's so hard. Like I've been a part of a couple of them, and I think it's getting harder and harder for companies now because there are more assets, there are more channels, there are more ways that you connect with customers. And the other hard part around it is if you're part of a really loved brand and you try and do anything more than a refresh, all you're doing is inviting trouble for anyone to have an opinion. So having worked on a large brand that almost everyone has a touch point with, it is really, really difficult because everyone at any customer level has an opinion of what you were, what you are, and they could definitely have an opinion of where you're going to be and what you want to change to or evolve to.
No one realizes until you go through it. Now it's the same. Brand refresh. If you change the logo, for example, in a refresh, or you do a rebrand and it's wholesale, nobody realizes what the implications are. And one simple example, doing one with a online gambling company a while ago. Everything else, changing a website, color swatches, fonts. Once you get to the nitty gritty, fonts, color swatches, tone of voice means all the copy's changing. Logo on every page. That's an entire new website rebuild. Now, if it's an e-com site, that's going to start getting pricey pretty quickly. But then you get to the nitty gritty of channel marketing activity. And normally it's fine. It's like, okay, we've got all our creative suite, but that tends to burn itself out fairly rapidly. That's on a roll through cycle. AI can probably support. We could probably generate new base assets, and then we build out a new suite from there. Affiliate marketing. We had something like 9,000 affiliates on the system. It was an online casino business, something like 9,000, of which probably half were active affiliates. It isn't a question of changing source code or changing a banner suite. You have to get them to amend all of their websites. How do you do that? Now, you've got a working relationship with them, so there should be some goodwill there, assuming you paid them on time. Do you incentivize them? Do you ask them nicely? Do they do it? Probably not all of them. And then you've got that horrible situation where, as the leader of the project, you've probably got 2,000 websites with your old, now out of date logos, inventory, color swatch sitting on it, reminding normally snoopy people in the business who are browsing on Google and go, oh, did you know? This website's got the old branding on it. Looks really bad. That's what happens. And that's one implication of many implications. So before anyone gets into that game, the first thing you do before you even start the project is you do the inventory. And if that inventory starts to become more painful than the net benefit of the project, then you want to suicide that project, because that's the end goal, isn't it? I mean, if it's not got a net benefit that's more than what it's going to cost in time, resources, and money to execute, then surely that's your answer. You shouldn't go anywhere. At least not on your watch. Don't make yourself that poison pill.
One of my mottos with some of my old team, they might laugh, was always be auditing, always be marketing, because you have to sort of understand what's going around and then you have to market towards them. So either changing perspective, keeping it, or giving them something to chew on or consider moving forward. There's a couple of questions that I'd love to ask you, because I think it's not really touched upon anywhere else. And often brand jargon, so internal brand conversation, some words and insights that we use, it often leaks out to the customer. The customer has no idea what it means. And you get it all the time. And I think marketers who've been doing it a long time see it a lot. How do you stop brand jargon from seeping out into the customer? Is there something, or a partner? Is there a way that you can stop that as a brand or marketing leader?
God, I don't know. I don't recall ever sort of experiencing that. I mean, in terms of like the brand guidelines for the outside world, I mean, I don't know who would have any actual interest in seeing it. But I mean, like I said, with the brand missions, they're very much internal facing, but they're internal mandates. We don't want the customer to do these things. We want the team to be doing the missions. We want the vision to be an end result of the mission by the team, and then the positioning which the customer will relate to. But none of those things are pertinent actions for the customer. There's no reason for them to see it. If they saw it, it would look like a wanky marketing document. It certainly wouldn't be dangerous in my eyes. It would just be a bit confusing. They don't understand or need to understand how they're being communicated in and why. But I'd be interested to hear then. So give us your examples of that happening. I'm fascinated.
So often brands will have something internally that will be like approved by, or it would be like the stamp of approval, or it would be something that the internal teams come up with that you've talked for such a long time, because it's a big internal project. You want to sing your own praises. You want to pull it out into the market. So then you've been doing it for such a long time, you use that language or lingo that you've created that ends up going out, because you've all talked around it so long, you've just forgotten that the meaning of that word doesn't mean anything to an outside customer, or you've not tested it. So I'll give you an example. Something was sent to me the other day. It was by like a quite well-respected brand, a company that a lot of people would know. And they were talking around a new product line that they have, and how it's been introduced. And they have like an internal shortlist and like an approved list, but they kept saying it's preferred. And I had no idea what that meant. So I just pinged back to them and said, what does preferred mean? What do you mean by preferred? Because I've worked in your place. So I'm guessing you mean this is people that you love and that you want other people to use or want to be connected to you. And they're, yeah, exactly. And I said, but a customer's not going to understand what that means, because you've just thrown a word at them with no context. And I think marketeers have lost that. I think marketeers have lost that.
Yeah, and I know what you mean now. No, I've definitely seen more of it. My favorite game when I do go to London, looking at the tube ads, and you see marketing lingo leaking into that stuff, and you look at it, you're like, unless you're targeting marketers, which seems highly unlikely considering there's plenty of people paid more in London. It is just jingoistic lingo that was probably from the brief. It's like, well, that's the intent. That's what we mean. And what it hasn't done, I think that feels more like a process breach of, you haven't actually gone through from brief to copy to translate the sentiment into customer friendly wording. So to me, that just sounds like lazy creative briefing or lazy design briefing, rather than a sort of brand slip. But I don't know, maybe our listeners have got examples. This is the sort of stuff I'd love to sort of hear about. Other examples of that at a wholesale way, or just their examples of horrible versions of B2B marketing bullshit dripping into campaigns.
I think that will be a whole dedicated Marketing Unfiltered episode.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you remove the over policing of brand? Obviously, you said rules and guidelines earlier. Is there something that, as I said, I think you should brand coach, not brand police? I think often when you go over to products and you say, you should never do this, and you wag your finger at them, all that's going to do is put all of their teams' backs up. Is there a way that you help?
Yeah, of course.
Or is there a way that you can help, or you help remove the over policing of brand?
It depends on the organization, depends on the size. If you've got 5,000 people organization where 2,000 people have got the ability to communicate with customers, whether it's customer service or CRM or VIP management, whatever it is, it's something that size, it has to nudge into the rules territory. We call them guidelines, call them rules, but I prefer your way. I think guidelines, but there has to be some sort of red notice going, this is how this works. This is why this is so important to speak in this tone of voice, to speak in these sorts of phrases rather than this sort. I always like having the anti-examples of like, we do this because this version sounds shit for these reasons. And, you have that in the guidelines book. You literally have a CRM email written badly with a line coming off it, like a markup saying, we don't say that because it's negative sentiment. We don't say that because that's not how our positive brand likes to be represented. But equally, you don't want to police too stringently. And the best example I think is sort of content marketing and social. But all those brands out there who may as well close up their social accounts because they get no engagement, they get minimal followers, they just repeat company mandates and updates and crappy images. They don't get it, versus those who are using social as an acquisition channel, as a brand building channel, as a content entity. The ones that are doing the latter, the ones that are successful, their teams have been empowered to take the tone of voice, the personality and positioning and interpret it in the social space. And the social space is a different space to direct mail, to CRM, to an ad campaign, to a TV spot. It is different. It's more colloquial. People exist in a more friendly way. So that's, for me, is a really tricky thing to get right and requires really talented people, both doing the briefing, so the senior boards or the people who have been running the brand project, and the social team themselves, who need to be really good at interpreting and reading the room. Because I find this a very interesting one with social, because as a CMO, you are accountable. Your team, if they get it wrong, if they have one of those cataclysmic fuck ups we read about once in a while, or actually most weeks, that's on you. But the individual obviously is going to take heat, because if they fucked up to the point that it gets in the press, then that's a serious one. But you're never going to get anywhere with social unless you have some levity and some freedom to converse with the world. And I think that comes down to partly education about the risks that could be involved. So that's where it's another example. It's worth doing that homework and education and discussion piece. It's real depth. Here's lots of examples of where people have actually got themselves in legal trouble from stuff posted on social. That frames the mind pretty well. But from there, it's like, equally, we want to be a brand that is using social to engage at a much higher and deeper level with a much broader audience. To do that, we have to ride closer to those edges, those metaphorical edges. And I, the CMO, am going on that journey with you. And we are going to talk about it, and we're going to do some baby steps first together, and we're going to find our feet. And then as we find our feet, and as you find your confidence, as we go another week without getting into any trouble, we will expand out how that works. And it's a test and learn process. That can all sit within the strictures and the framework of your brand personality and tone of voice, assuming you have a fun one that allows levity. But you need to go on the journey with them. You need to obviously defend them. They're your team members. It's your responsibility. They are your responsibility. But if you want to get proper traction, then you have to get to that place, which is fun, which is engaging, which is actually engaging with real people in mass volume at scale. So I think that's just something where going through the baby steps, going through the educational piece, doing it together as a proper project, that time is really well invested. Or you just go, oh, here's some rules, don't breach them or you'll get fired, and watch your social just become a cost center. And that's what most of them are, in my opinion. Most brand socials may as well not exist.
I think that's the thing that people get most confused around when I engage with different companies is if you're spending a lot of money on social and you're not really seeing the rewards, or you're not constantly being sent your own social media, then I think a lot of the time it is a cost center. And I think a lot of brands could do without it. There's an extension to what you said is what I love a lot in recent examples is Notion, and how they're basically defined and powered, like they're community powered what their brand was. So it shaped their product, but also enabled them to truly understand what their brand was and how it was sort of conceived and onboarded. And I think there's a lot of brands now that will learn a lot actually from companies like Notion, who had a product that was fit for everyone. And then people actually helped the brand evolve because they were building templates and they were so active in the building of the
That's a
product
dream,
and the
though.
brand.
Not everyone. I mean, I think as much as I think Notion has done things very well, the nature of their product, the nature of the platform is such that it is one giant feedback loop, and not everyone's going to have that. If you're launching a new iced tea brand, you don't get that. You can build a community, you can engage with certain tribes and do that. Notion's fortunate that it's in that digital space where effectively community is by definition part of the platform they're building. And then that feedback loop has been encouraged. I think what they've done very well is to allow for that and also listen to it. But unfortunately not everyone gets that. But I think everyone can be more open-eared to the customers as to what is coming back. It's like those satellite things that's pinging things out into the outer depths of space and hope to hear something back from aliens. You ping out, and you have to be listening. If you aren't listening and doing something about it, then you're probably missing out on what the real world thinks of you. In fact, you definitely are. And that way lies boredom and apathy. So,
And the last question in this sort of section that I wanted to dive into is there's a lot of talk around you should own all your own comms now, and a lot of people say go direct. So, whether you should post all your comms via yourselves on your own channels, like whether it's podcasts, YouTubes, etc., and own the brand message and what's sort of said around it. And then you blend in with press and journalists, which is flipped it on its head around that. When do you think people should go direct and own it? And when do you think that owning the brand means, going out and being interviewed by the journalist or by the influencer or by the creator? Do you think there's a rule nowadays for owning brand message and getting brand out there for most traction?
I don't know on this one. I mean, as a rule of thumb, life's hard enough as a marketer and as a brand. There's lots of other brands. People don't particularly like talking about them. It's hard enough to get a journalist to show any interest at all in what you're doing, let alone write nice things about it. So my default setting is take any opportunity to have noise as long as it's positive. In some guys, your owned channels and your paid channels, they're the ones which, yeah, of course you own them or pay for them. So then you can be more explicit about getting your messages out in the way and the manner and the time you want them to be. And then wrapping around that, if you're doing a good job, and this is the critical bit, if you're doing a good job, then people will be talking and writing and thinking about you in those tones and those frameworks anyway, because you're talking about exciting stuff that's new and interesting and edgy or whatever it might be. Or, it might be an insurance and they're talking about you just being safe and stoic and boring. And that's what you want in your insurance company, whatever it might be. That's probably a trick for good comms, good media relations, and a good tactical comms team and corporate comms team to be taking your messages and getting them understood in a way that becomes worth speaking about. But the idea of sort of controlling everything and dismissing anything you don't own, that feels kind of paranoid / power hungry, or narcissistic. I think we should take any opportunity to be talked about, because otherwise they're talking about our competitors, and none of us like that.
I do. My sort of quick takeaway would be if you're confident in some of the messages you can put out and ask really pertinent questions, and poke at products and your brand and your company and what's out there, and you've got a great distribution engine, do more and more of it, because at the moment, unless you've got real cut through, you're going to need enough material and good content to get out there and hit enough messages to get people to know who you are and what you do and why you're different. Because otherwise you're never going to get stopped in a feed, right? And that's how a lot of people find out about you, or whether that's TikTok, Instagram, whether that's WhatsApp, iMessage. You have to be something that either is recommended or stops the fun from scrolling. So that's the time that I think brands can be smart or savvy to leverage it. Whereas, like you said, if you can take any opportunity to get in front of an audience, whether that's a journalist, an influencer, creator, or something different, but it could even be a B2B press event, then that's definitely something I think you should blend the two together. And if you're not saying something interesting to your core audience or to an adjacent audience, you're probably not ever going to be interesting to a bigger audience. So I think you have to be really smart at distribution and understanding how to get cut through now.
Yeah.
To dive into, have you got 2 or 3 sort of guardrails for people to how to decide who should be front facing and the communicator within the business? A lot of people shifted to CEO only. Do you think there is 2 or 3 recommendations you can make to people?
It should be the CEO. Whether it's crisis comms, whether it's big announcements, they are ultimately the gatekeeper of the entire organization, the senior figure in the business, and the board's representative. That's who you want. So, number one, make sure your CEOs have media training. There are some very good orgs out there that do very good, relatively concise media training exercises. Make sure they've got it, because not every CEO is a natural born speaker. In theory, they're leaders. Not all CEOs are good leaders, it turns out. And certainly not all of them are great speakers, but you don't get to choose your CEO sometimes. So make sure they're media trained, make sure they understand why that's important and what it actually might mean. Part of that should be your crisis comm strategy anyway, because everyone should have a well-prepped crisis comm strategy. And I've only done a couple of those really formally, and they were fascinating. And I'm so glad I've done that training. I'm so glad I've been into that zone. Beyond there, journalists don't like speaking to marketing people, even though us marketers, like quite a few of us tend to be extroverts. Quite a few of us have got experience speaking in public, blah, blah, blah. Journalists don't like speaking to marketing people because they suspect, rightfully, that we're going to try and sell them something. So we're out the frame. So we should be the facilitators of the process and the advisors and the motivators and the encouragers. That should be our role. Beyond there, when you do your media training, make sure your CFO/COO are in the media training too. If the CEO is not available, if there's comms that need to be done at the same time to 2 sources, lean on the next best one. But beyond that, I think it ought to be the CEO for fairly obvious reasons.
Yeah. Also, if you're part of a big company, typically, if you're listed or you're going to thinking about becoming on the stock market, your CFO, your COO, your CEO, and your investor relations are used to talking to big audiences and taking tough questions. So that's something that I think they should all have, like the version of media training, as well as being able to take the tricky questions. One thing I would add also is there's new media now, which is podcasts and video interviews. And if your CEO isn't prepared to give something away, or when they're really relaxed and leaning out, as opposed to leaning into questions, they're going to have stories that they're willing to talk around. Otherwise, very often they're just not going to get cut through, and potentially it's not going to hit the feeds that people have. Should we dive into?
On that, I say a quick one on that though. There's another thing sort of related to it about CEOs. I've had a couple who were really reticent about people speaking, like other team members speaking at conferences, because they thought that they were basically platforming themselves to get poached. And I've always been very, very vehemently of the opposite school of thought of, build people, build their careers, build their profiles, build their profiles because it'll probably benefit your business depending on what you're selling, but also don't hold people back. If there's one thing that will make people want to leave sooner, it's being held back. So encourage them to do that. If they get talent spotted, and that's probably on you to make sure that they're satisfied and motivated in their work. One thing that'll motivate them is being G'd up by a line manager that encourages them to grow and build more skills. But it was only CEOs I've seen who are like, oh no, I don't think we should let that happen. And you're like, do you realize how hard it is to get team members to voluntarily do these events, which is good for us? It's an event where we can sell products. And they're like, no, I think it's a risk. And I understand where the thinking comes from, but I disagree with it entirely.
Conferences are the best, from my experience, are the best ways for you to hit and connect with adjacent audiences, because you're being able to talk around the brand, talk around what you've done, why you've done it, and how you've done it. So actually you're going to get far more in that. It's far more akin to a great podcast interview, just a little bit more restricted. And also, if you work at a big company, they're going to ask to vet your presentation. Most likely they're going to take out all the juicy bits, all the best bits. So just consider if you're a marketing leader or a brand leader.
Well, it depends on that one. It depends on that one. I mean, most of the time, I've rarely been paid for the speaking engagements. I've done mine for sort of PR benefit and free conference passes and the occasional free flight. In those instances, I'll talk about what I want to talk about. You're not paying me. The value exchange is I'm giving you free content, which I'll make interesting because I want to be interesting, because that's how I'll get more business. But you don't get to vet my content for the benefit of your agenda. So if you're paying people, absolutely, do what you like. It's your event, you're paying a fee, and you want the products you're demanding. But if you're not paying, don't be an editor.
Yeah, if you're part of a big company, especially those that are listed, they will vet your presentations, or they'll vet what you say. So it's something that I actually strongly disagree with, and have had many disagreements with at large companies, is you shouldn't try and restrict or demote what someone's trying to say, as long as they're not giving away anything that's competitive information or strict IP. Then you should let them go, because they're going to tell that story far better than anyone else, and it's in a safer environment to enable them to do that.
Yeah, no, totally.
Should we dive into a quick fire round, Harry?
Yeah, let's do it.
Is there such a thing as brand performance?
No. And yes. I mean, as a teasing question designed to make me frustrated and a bit angry. Yeah, brand can perform better, but in the guise of performance marketing as a brand thing, no, they look very different, even if they might be trying to accomplish the same ultimate goal. That's the rubbish answer. Anyway.
Is brand really a growth driver?
Yes.
Is brand controversy worth it? So Gap, American Eagle, etc., the recent examples.
Loaded question, because my American Eagle thoughts because you read my article. It can be, but it's a really thin line, razor thin. And if you slip, then that's going to sting, and it's easy to slip. So tread with caution.
And you're only as good as the person fronting the campaign is perceived. Has social been a net positive or a net negative on brand?
Net positive.
Should brand be separate to marketing? So should it operate separately?
No, brand is part of marketing.
And are there any recent examples of great branding or great brands that you would recommend to other people to check out?
Trying to think. I mean, these days I'm in the middle of the Cotswolds, so half the brands I engage with aren't really available anywhere else. My local brew and fawn shop, which I recommend to anyone to go and visit because it's wonderful. But on a bigger scale, try and think. I think at a big scale, I think BYD, the car company, is doing a lot of things extremely well. all the way through from the way the products look, the way they're marketed, the way they're priced, how they are taking all the F ups from Tesla and turning them into net brand positives. And they're doing it in a fairly subtle and understated way while shipping a lot of product. Now, there's a risk that their pricing policy might hurt them in the long term because they're undercutting everyone to get market share, but they appear to have incredibly deep pockets, so they can probably stomach it. So it's not that exciting an answer. It isn't sort of jazz hands, new fashion or tech piece or AI platform. But I think if you're looking at large scale organization that really wasn't anywhere 5 years ago, there's a lot to like about not feeling the need to be Hollywood. They just do very strong things in a competitive sector extremely well and don't really set off the fireworks about it. It's just solidly good. And they're selling a lot of cars. And ultimately, that's the task. We're all here just to sell more of the business we work for. And it doesn't always need to be award-winning, exciting, pop star, gleaning, future-proofing, AI, blah, blah, blah. It can just be really good. And I think that's my boring answer. BYD is boringly good.
I think the telltale sign is how many times that BYD's been recommended in different chat groups, etc. So I agree. And the last question is, what's the one recommendation you'd have for people in this AI era as a brand leader?
Keep your ears open. It's certainly what I'm doing. Our mutual friend, Oren, who's been on Marketing Unfiltered a few weeks ago, I listen to every word he says because I'm at the sort of beginning of my journey of trying to become better educated about AI. I'm naive to it, as most of us are, but I'm trying to learn. I think the only thing is just keep your ears open, keep an open mind. Don't invest too heavily too soon in anything because none of us really know. Like the rules are being written as we go and then they're changing and then a new platform turns up and then suddenly Reddit isn't the big deal that it was 2 weeks ago. And then all of that, like I said earlier, like wastage is our enemy. There's a huge amount of wastage opportunity in all of this. And yet the upside opportunity is probably way more significant. So we need to be in this game. Second mover advantage is going to be quite a big thing, being ready and nimble enough to dive into ops, take advantage of them, pivot, change, be creatively aligned with a new platform or channel, whatever it might be. Gen EO or GEO is a very big deal. And, just become accomplished at learning and accomplished at fading and accomplished at resetting. That's what good marketers will look like in 5 years, which isn't a million miles away from what good marketers look like now. It's just we've got another new significant channel, which is already in the post and making waves. So, ears open, keep learning, keep trying and testing, and don't get wound up when you fail, because that way lies madness.
Quick extension is concentrate on the consumer, your customer, not on competitors and not around all the tools that keep coming out and keep updating. Customers will always. Cool. Thanks, Harry. Where should people connect with you? Where should they look you up when they want to work on a big brand project?
The usual places. I'm determined. Let's get more subscribers on Marketing Unfiltered. Danny and I have been doing this a year now together. I'm loving it, really enjoying what we're doing, but we like more subscribers because, I don't know, that just kind of says that it's going well for us. But other than that, you can find me on LinkedIn as usual. I normally post a lot of nonsense. And then Harry at brandarchitects.co.uk is me if you want to have a chat about anything.
Perfect. Thanks, Harry. And we'll talk soon, no doubt.
Cheers, Danny.